Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hey, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a really full evening, and I think, people are expecting us to start later, but we'll just let folks roll in as they will. Thanks for everybody for being here. My name is Dana Perls, and I am here with Friends of the Earth, one of the member organizations of Synbio Watch, which is hosting the 2014 Speaker Series Critical Conversations on Synthetic Biology. So we're super excited tonight to bring you tonight's conversations, GMOs 2.0, Synthetic Biology, Farmers, and Food. And we'll be examining how this extreme form of genetic engineering stands to radically change our food system and how it impacts agriculture, the environment, and livelihoods of farmers across the world. So we have an excellent panel lined up tonight. For those of you who have friends who didn't get to see this, we're going to be live streaming tonight, and it also will be posted after that on synbiowatch.org, and I believe on kpfa.org as well. We want everybody to participate. This is a very rich conversation, and to make it easier on our presenters, we were passing out little index cards at the front, or you can use scrap paper. We'd like you to write your questions down, and then for Q&A, we'll be having volunteers collect all of the questions, and then some of them will be the same, and we'll be able to combine them, and so that's how we're going to handle the Q&A. So please make sure to write down your questions. We really want to hear everybody. And lastly, these talks are free because of the generous support of both the Foundation, CS Fund, which is here tonight, and also because of the generosity of people who come to these talks. We'd like those to remain free. So as you leave tonight, if you haven't already, there'll be hats at the door, and please be kind and give a donation so we can keep these for free. So with that, we're joined by Alejandrino, García, Castaño at the end, and Evelyn, who's going to be translating, John Roulac from Nutiva, and Neth Daño from Etc. Group, and of course Anuradha and Mittal from the Oakland Institute.
Thanks, Dana. My name is Anuradha Mittal, and I'm with the Oakland Institute, based in Oakland, California. Oh, I'm supposed to hold it this way? Okay. Well, technology and I don't obviously work very well together. I am technologically challenged. When Dana contacted me and wanted me to be the moderator of this event called GMOs 2.0, synbio, Farmers, and Food, and I was like, what are you talking about? So you have a moderator who knows very little, but as I was told as I was walking in, it's a great place to be able to ask questions so I can learn about it. And I hope it's going to be the same for everyone here. Synbio is something, as somebody who has worked on issues of food, agriculture for nearly 2 decades, is something that I've just started hearing very recently. And today I got hold of a PR, a press release from the Transparency Market Research. And I was very excited to see what it says. It says it plays an important role in the production of improved nutrition or cost-effective medicines, increasing number of scientific research coupled with rising participation of government and private organizations for the development of synthetic biology, which helps the growth of the market globally. It obviously cites a lot of benefits, deals with challenges that most of us in this room are concerned about. And I think this panel today, we have a very distinguished panel. My questions to them would be really focused around helping to understand, is it really helping with improved nutrition? Is it really helping with medicines? Do we have finally the solutions that we're looking for? So with that said, as I said, we have an amazing panel here. The speakers are going to have 5 minutes each to share, which feels very unfair because each one of them is an expert who could talk the whole evening. So I apologize in advance for doing that, but it's not my fault. The organizers asked me to do so. So, yeah, having said that I'm not responsible, I thought the first speaker who would make a good person to start with is Dana Perls. Dana Perls Well, I did see her this evening and called her, she's like a dog with a bone, a pit bull. But if you listen to her resume, you will know why I called her that. She's the food and technology campaigner with Friends of the Earth, where she organizes campaigns on genetic engineering, including GE-free seafood and no synbio campaign. And she has a very rich history of working with groups such as Pesticide Watch to ensure that our food system remains free of corporate control. So Dana. Okay, actually.
Pull up my PowerPoint. Do? Okay. Sam, will you help? Okay. I'm not much better than Anuradha. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm basically going to lay out the basics of synthetic biology. What we have here is, as we race to understand the impacts of genetic engineering and to keep track of the growing list of GMO foods and products on the market, there's a new synthetic ingredient that we need to be aware of. And this is a new product that's coming straight out of a petri dish, entering some of our favorite products, from ice cream to face cream. The products are made through an extreme form of genetic engineering called synthetic biology, which we call synbio for short. This is an emerging technology that's rapidly developing and entering our market quite quickly. Like traditional GMOs, these are products that are virtually unregulated, haven't been assessed adequately, and are, of course, unlabeled. The food and cosmetic industry and the natural product industry are the front line for synthetic biology ingredients. Ingredients being planned include things like synbio vanilla, coconut oil and cocoa butter alternatives, stevia, saffron, and many other high-value goods that are produced from across the world. Companies that are engaged in this production include ones like Solazyme, Evolva, LS9, Alelix, and a number of others. The companies that are using these products, the ones we know about or that are planning to use these products, include ones possibly like Ecover, Unilever, L'Oreal, Coca-Cola, and a number of others that have not been disclosed yet. So one of the things that we need to know is that despite marketing claims, these ingredients are not sustainable, they're not natural, and could have serious impacts on the health of people and on our planet's biodiversity. And on the slide behind me, this is just an example of some of the companies that are highly invested in synthetic biology. You'll see that a number of them are not quite sustainable companies. Cargill, DuPont, Monsanto, GM, BP. I wouldn't describe any of these as sustainable, nor companies that have been particularly interested in what is natural. So what we do know, though, is that these products threaten the livelihoods of small farmers and people who are working on sustainable ag across the world. And I would say, in light of the last slide, how did we get here? What happened is that several companies wanted to get invested into new forms of biofuel. And they found that this technically wasn't possible, or they couldn't do it at the time, couldn't figure out how to scale up and still make a profit. So in order to not lose their investors entirely, they turned to a new set of products, high value, low volume goods that you could make an easy profit from. So how does synthetic biology work? Instead of swapping genes from one species to another, as in traditional genetic engineering, there's a new basket of genetic engineering techniques, including computer-generated DNA, directed evolution, site-specific mutagenesis, and more. And all of these different techniques all cluster around an approach, which is called synthetic biology. So what makes it different from what we have before? What makes it different from genetic engineering? Basically, rather than just having one way to do genetic engineering, we now have a lot of ways to engineer the genome of an organism, going far beyond what was developed in 1974. And so part of the reason that we're here is to catch up with the industry so that we're not caught off guard and not know what actually is happening today versus what was happening 20 years ago. One example is of a synthetic biology method is that scientists can sit down at a computer and write an entirely new genetic code. So you sit down, type in the code that you want, print it out with a DNA printer, and then inject this into organisms such as yeast or algae. And you can even try to create entirely new organisms as opposed to only just replicate existing ones. So then you have this yeast or algae which has been re-engineered with an entirely new DNA code. You feed it with an incredibly large amount of sugar or biomass, and that organism, that mini factory, is now going to produce vanillin or stevia, or something that could be an alternative to coconut oil or cocoa butter. Basically, it will produce whatever it is we have re-engineered it to produce. So what are the health and environmental problems with this? Let me see, I'm behind on my slides. So synthetic biology processes rely on the industry's self-regulation, and we know that this can be quite a problem. Almost nothing is known about the safety of these products for human health or the environment. The ways in which synthetic biology organisms will interact with the natural environment is unpredictable and potentially permanent. If you have invasive species, if you have pollutants, these are organisms that self-replicate, and once in the environment are nearly impossible to recall. At this point, as far as we know, impossible to recall. So if companies like Evolva and Solazyme, two of the developers of the synthetic biology vanillin and coconut oil alternatives, if they're allowed to falsely market their products as natural, consumers will be fooled, and the demand for the synthetic biology products could displace the demand for what is actually and truly natural. For example, if a product like vanillin depends on an intact rainforest and the demand for natural vanilla is removed, there's no longer an economic value necessarily for that rainforest, and it might easily be replaced by things like soy and sugar and palm oil. You also have devastation of rainforests that may happen directly and indirectly from sugarcane on eco-sensitive places like the Amazon and the Cerrado of Brazil, which is one of the most fragile and biodiverse ecosystems in the world. The devastation of these places is happening at an astounding rate. This will only be exacerbated as synthetic biology products, which require an exorbitant amount of sugarcane and biomass, is increased. So as these industries scale up and they need more sugar, we have sugarcane expansion. And so you're going to see a higher rate of deforestation, land grabs, displacement, et cetera. So it's kind of a multi-step process that leads us to problems. So in conclusion, before this next wave of genetic engineering gets rubber stamped as natural or sustainable, we need transparency for consumers, we need regulations, we need scientific assessment, and we need to make sure that this is actually going to be okay for people's health and the environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daño. I'm beginning to understand at least the start of why it's called GMO 2.0. Before we continue, I had a clarifying question for you, Daño, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You said this technology as of now is unassessed, something that we were concerned around genetic engineering. Just quickly, are there any international regulations? Do countries have any comprehensive regulations as we have seen come about with GMOs?
No, at this point internationally, there are no regulations on synthetic biology. Our regulations as they are at least 30 years old. The regulations that we have for genetic engineering as it stands are quite inadequate. At present, we have the United Nations looking at synthetic biology and debating how are we going to deal with this? Should there be a moratorium on the use of synthetic biology before it's released into the environment? What kind of scientific assessments do we need? So there's no regulation anywhere in the world right now.
Thank you, and that's incredibly scary to hear. But as I said, I'm sitting here and I'm having this moment of nostalgia as I look at Neth, our second speaker. the sister and friend from the Philippines. Have had the opportunity to work with her for over 2 decades now. Neth is actively involved in Asian regional movement strategies around climate, technology, food sovereignty, biodiversity, and sustainable development. I cannot think of a more articulate, strong voice against genetic engineering, especially around golden rice in Asia as Neth, and we're very fortunate to have Neth here. Thank you, Neth.
Thank you. I actually wanted to stop Anuradha from revealing how many years have we known each other, because that will give you a clue on how old we are. So I have some slides, and I don't know where they are. Sorry. But while I'm being helped to find my slides, I'd like to thank you for coming over and for your interest on this issue. I have to let you know that this is the biggest crowd I've ever spoken before on synthetic biology. Yeah, I have to tell you, and that's heartwarming, because like back home, people are interested, are scared, are very alarmed about synthetic biology. But I've always heard feedback about it being sci-fi, scientific fiction, which are exactly the same feedback I've heard when we started talking about GMOs. In the Philippines in 1993 and 1994. So that gives you a clue about my age. It actually gives me a deja vu. And I always tell friends that we should at least learn from the history of GMOs, not to repeat the same fatal mistake of saying that it's sci-fi when it's staring right before our eyes that reality has already hit. And we try to close our eyes saying that, oh, we have so many problems. We have golden rice, we have GM corn, and now you're bringing us another set of problems. Like every time I enter a room, some people would be like, have this dreadful look in their face. They said, oh, she's bringing us another problem related to technology. I'm not a how do you say it? Doomsayer? No? Doom bringer. But then, I always have to hammer on people that we have new and emerging technologies coming, staring right before our eyes, that are not sci-fi. They may be new to our ears, but they are actually affecting us even before we understand what they are. And synthetic biology is one of this. And ETC group, etc. group has been known to work on issues that nobody dares to touch with a 10-foot pole because it's too sci-fi, it's too technical. And as explained by Daño, I think one advantage that we have on synthetic biology is we actually have the experience of genetic engineering to let people know that it's building on some technology platform and bringing about a new technology platform that will bring new challenges to us as a world and to developing countries in particular. And it's sad, it's even pathetic to some extent that we actually become concerned about impacts of new technologies when they're already hitting people negatively. And I think learning from GMOs and their impacts on communities, not just on the environment, but on livelihood, we have to be alert on new developments like synthetic biology. And as Daño said, we're not talking of sci-fi. We're talking of real technologies affecting real lives and will be affecting thousands, even millions of lives even before we know it. And while the stock brokers, the stock traders are counting stocks and shares, they're actually affecting lives of farmers dealing with commodities. When we say commodities and synthetic biology, we have a string. And Daño has mentioned some of them, like we have coconut oil, cacao, we have saffron, stevia, vanilla, vetiver, palm kernel oil, rubber, that are being subject to synthetic biology, not just experiments, but also now piloting, and some products are already being commercialized as we speak now. And we have a situation where the potential victims, those who will be potentially affected, don't even have a clue on what is this. Like just before I left, I was discussing the issue of synthetic biology and coconut with the oleochemicals processors back home, and They said, what is it? Now, they don't have a clue at all on what the technology is all about. Of course, they're very interested. And they said they will try to chew on it. And I was actually amazed because when we first raised this to the Philippine coconut producers, the Small Farmers Federation, the interest was just automatic. Like they know, like it could spell doom to their livelihoods, to their cultures, to their lives. So I will go through some statistics just to give you hard facts on where we are when it comes to synthetic biology and selected commodities. Since I only have 5 minutes, I have selected a few, which I hope you'll find interesting. Like, for instance, we have vetiver oil that is being targeted by some synthetic biology companies like Alilix. Like, I'm sure those of you who have been into fragrances know about vetiver oil, which is the foundation. 90% of all Western cosmetics and perfumes are actually based on vetiver oil. The fragrance is widely used in cosmetics. It's actually extracted from the aromatic root of a grass native to India that is also being promoted for controlling soil erosion in many parts of the world, like Southeast Asia. But its value is mainly on the oil extracted from the grass, that fragrant oil. And there's this company called Alilix that has engineered a metabolic pathway in some microbes to produce a fragrance compound found in vetiver oil. And they've actually patented a biosynthetic fragrance called Epivone, which they have launched for commercial sale in late 2012. When we talk of vetiver grass oil in particular, we talk of the farmers who grow them. And Haiti, one of the world's poorest countries, actually is the main producer of vetiver oil worldwide. Farmers in Haiti, also in Indonesia, China, Japan, India, Brazil, and Reunion grow vetiver for export. The production looks small, 250 tons, but if you talk of fragrant oil, that's a lot. And around 60,000 people, farmers in one region alone in Haiti actually depend on vetiver as their primary source of income. And it's grown in about 10,000 hectares of land in that region. In 2007, before the financial crisis hit, actually Haiti accounted for about 60% of exports of vetiver oil worldwide, and the annual export earning from vetiver is about 10 million to 18 million. 10 million in 2009 when the financial crisis hit, 18 million at its highest. And now we also go to really high-value spices like saffron, the world's most expensive spice, which is largely produced for its flavoring and coloring value. A company called Evolva has actually identified a microbial pathway to produce the 3 main chemicals found in saffron using synthetic biology. The annual market of saffron is about $660 million per year. And over 90% of the crocus flowers used to produce saffron as a spice are sourced from one country, Iran. So actually, next to pistachio, saffron is the most important non-petroleum export product of Iran and employs hundreds of people. And you have vanilla. I will not go into this because our friend Alejandrino from Africa, from Mexico, will talk about that. But I think I would go and end with a discussion on the impacts of synthetic biology and coconut, which is nearest to me. The Philippines being the world's #1 exporter of coconut oil, where you have actually millions of people dependent on coconut growing annually, and coconut oil is valued for its lauric oils that are used in the manufacturing of detergents, soaps, and cosmetics. And there are actually 3 companies, all based in California, namely Solazyme, Codexis, and LS9, that have actually developed engineered microbes and algae to produce lauric oils that could replace coconut oil in the market. And all of this, the 3 companies actually have ongoing agreements and joint ventures with key companies at chemicals and manufacturing companies to produce lauric oil from algae and microbes. So I will not go into the details of this, but the statistics actually emphasize how important coconut oil is to the economy of coconut is important to the economy of the Philippines and to the lives of farmers. It's grown by 3.5 million coconut farmers, most of them small-scale landholders, in 3.5 million hectares of land planted to coconut. So in sum, just to sum up, the potential impacts of synbio to farmers, as already discussed by Dana, and also the statistics that I've gone through, synthetic biology will substitute natural commodities and products produced in developing countries, mostly by small-scale farmers. It will result to destabilization of the natural product markets and disruption of trade, and more importantly, it will displace farmers from livelihood and communities from their basic source of income, and it will have far-reaching impacts on agricultural economies across the developing world, which many of these companies don't actually look carefully on, and which actually make decisions that do not involve countries that are dependent on these commodities, much more on farmers whose livelihoods, whose economies, whose survival and cultures depend on the production of these commodities.
Thank you, Neth. I already have so many questions for you, but what we will do is do 5 minutes each and then come back because there are questions around. I mean, you mentioned land grab and you say land grab, and I go, oh. So about that as to, and farmers and what it means. So we'll come back to you. Our third speaker is Alejandrino García Castaño, who comes from Veracruz, Mexico. Before we came to the event, we were sitting where you mentioned that in your cooperative of vanilla growers in Mexico, there used to be 6,000 farmers. Since synthetic vanilla has come out and been there, only 1,000 farmers remain. So I'm sure we'll hear a very an experience from the ground which impacts real lives. Alejandrino is researching regional rituals, dances for the Centro de las Artes Indigenas in Veracruz. What I found fascinating about you is that you performed the Papantala Flyers dance, which was recently named Intangible Cultural Heritage by UNESCO. So please welcome Alejandrino, a member of a vanilla cultivator family who speaks his native language, Totonaca, and thanks to Evelyn, who will be translating for us.
Pues buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Alejandrino García, vengo de Veracruz, en México, y pues ahora yo les voy a hablar sobre la vainilla, de cómo está siendo afectada también por productos sintéticos que han entrado a nuestro país.
Good evening to all. My name is Alejandrino, and I come from Veracruz, Mexico. Well, now I'm going to be speaking to all of you around how synthetic products have been affecting the production of vanilla.
Y para tratar ese tema, yo considero 5 puntos importantes que todos debemos de saber. Primeramente, qué es la vainilla, su centro de origen también de la misma, cómo a través del tiempo los pueblos lo hemos estado cuidando, y además cómo está afectando no solamente a la economía en la región de Veracruz, sino también al estado de comunicación y a la cultura, ¿no? Y bueno, empecemos entonces con el primer punto.
So when we talk about this subject, I believe that there are 5 main points that everybody really needs to know about vanilla. And that is, 1, what is vanilla? Its center of origin, how native peoples have been cultivating vanilla for hundreds of years, and then also how synthetic biology is affecting the economy of vanilla, not just in Veracruz, but also, or not just the economy, but also the culture of the area. So let's start with the first point.
Bueno, pues traigo algunas imágenes, ojalá los pudiéramos ver, pero mientras
I brought some
comenzamos.
images that I hope will be able to be put up.
Y bueno, primeramente la vainilla pertenece a la familia de las orquídeas y en todo el mundo se conocen aproximadamente 40 especies diferentes de vainilla.
So the first thing that I'd like to point out is that vanilla belongs to the family of orchids, and around the world there are 40 species of orchids that produce vanilla that are known.
Para su reproducción tenemos que sembrar plantas de vainilla de aproximadamente 40 o 50 centímetros, esperar 2 años a que pueda crecer y pueda tener su primera floración, y la cual polinizamos manualmente.
So for the reproduction, it's important that everyone know that we grow the orchids and we need them to grow to a height of about 40 to 50 centimeters. It takes about 2 years for the first flowering to occur, and we pollinate these flowers manually.
Y pues después de la polinización tenemos que esperar 9 meses para que podamos hacer la cosecha. En mi región la relacionamos mucho con la concepción de un hijo en el vientre de la madre, que también tiene que durar 9 meses.
So after the pollinization, we have to wait an additional 9 months to harvest the vanilla. And in my community, we make an analogy between the harvesting of vanilla with the birthing of a child, because the gestation period is also 9 months.
Actualmente Madagascar es el principal país en producir vainilla, y el segundo país en más producir es México, de la cuales dependemos cerca de 10,000 familias directamente de esta producción.
So currently, Madagascar is the principal producer of vanilla. The second country with the highest production is Mexico. In my region, there are 10,000 families that depend on the production of vanilla.
Es necesario mencionar que la producción total de la vainilla en todo el mundo deja alrededor de una ganancia de 240 millones anuales en dólares, y es por eso que algunas organizaciones están tratando de hacer vainillas modificadas.
It's important to mention that worldwide, the industry of vanilla is at about 240 million annually. And for this reason, we know that there are many organizations that are trying to get into the industry of production.
Y hablando un poco del centro de origen de la vainilla, bueno, hablando del centro de origen de la vainilla, no se tiene específicamente un dato de dónde fue, dónde estuvo la primera planta de vainilla. Lo que sí tenemos es que en el Totonacapan, en Veracruz, en donde yo vivo, desde hace más de 300 años se ha estado domesticando, por llamarlo de alguna manera, a la planta de la vainilla.
So speaking of the center of origin of the plant, we really don't have any details where the first plant was grown. But in my area, my region of Totonacapan, we know that it was about 300 years ago that we began domesticating this orchid.
Y pues bueno, una vez que entra entonces la producción de vainilla sintética a nuestro país, pues declara directamente la competencia económica a la vainilla natural, y es por eso que nosotros entonces intentamos hacer nuevas producciones de vainilla.
So now that we've seen the entry of synthetic vanilla into the market, it's basically declared competition economically for the production of natural vanilla. And so this is what we're trying to deal with.
Y para hacer competencia también a estos nuevos modelos de vainilla sintética, creamos modelos de producción masiva o de producción en árboles frutales para su doble aprovechamiento. Sin embargo, nos hemos dado cuenta que estas técnicas no han funcionado, y por lo cual decidimos entonces muchos productores regresar a una alternativa más tradicional.
So in order to compete with these new models of production, we found ourselves having to adopt new models of production. And this included a large-scale production of vanilla, as well as the simultaneous growing of vanilla on fruit trees. But in the end, we found that none of these techniques were really working, and so that pushed us to revert back to even more traditional ways of producing vanilla.
Y es entonces que regresamos a los cultivos en los acahuales, como normalmente nosotros los conocemos allá, que son montes vírgenes, en donde la producción de la vainilla es de manera natural, es decir, no utilizamos ni químicos ni abonos para su propia producción.
So we returned to what is known as the virgin way of producing vanilla, which means that we don't use any sort of chemicals or any sort of fertilizers in the production.
Y es entonces aquí donde nos damos cuenta que la entrada de nuevos productos sintéticos a nosotros nos ha afectado, y un caso muy específico fue la entrada de la cumarina en el caso de la vainilla.
So here is where we realize that synthetic products have really affected our industry, and one case in point is the case of cumarina and the way that it's affected our industry.
Cuando sale este producto sale con el logo de vainilla natural de Papantla, y esto entonces perjudica al nombre y a la reputación de la región productora de vainilla.
So when this product first came out, it was introduced with the logo of natural vanilla, and so that immediately put at risk the name and the reputation of truly natural vanilla production.
Y entonces en este país vecino, Estados Unidos, prohíbe la venta de la vainilla en algún tiempo dentro del país por temor a que tuviera cumarina, y como bien sabemos es dañino para nuestra salud.
So the United States, our neighboring country, for many years prohibited the sale of vanilla because it feared that it might have contained this element of cumarina, which has known to produce health side effects.
Y lo peor en este caso no solamente es que rompe con el esquema económico que producía la vainilla, sino detrás de todo ello rompe con el esquema social y cultural dentro de las comunidades indígenas en México.
And the worst is that all these effects are breaking with our structure, our economic structure, and beyond the economic structure, the social and the cultural structure of indigenous communities in Mexico.
Y es así entonces como se van perdiendo muchos cultivos de vainilla en la región, y con ello se van dejando enseñanzas de padres a hijos, y pues con esto mismo vamos haciendo pérdida de nuestra identidad cultural, al menos en esta región.
And this is the way that we are losing the cultivation of this vanilla, and as a result, we're losing a lot of traditions that are passed from fathers to sons, and in a lot of ways, our cultural identity in my home region of Veracruz.
Y es por esta misma razón que creemos que si en todos los países dejamos entrar productos sintéticos, van a acabar con nuestra propia historia y sobre todo con el cultivo de la vainilla, que es muy tradicional.
So that's why we fear the entry of synthetic products, because we feel that it will finish with our history, with our story, and definitely with the production of vanilla.
Y bueno, solo para terminar, consideramos que para que esto no suceda, muchos de los apoyos que en gobiernos debe de haber deben ser dirigidos hacia el campo, hacia esta nueva producción, y no dirigidos a las empresas que estén dedicados a hacer productos genéticamente modificados.
So to finish, in order to avoid all of this from happening, we believe that we need the support of the government for farmers that are producing natural vanilla, and not for their support to go to these companies that are introducing synthetic products.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. I didn't know all that I've just learned about vanilla, something that we take for granted in our ice cream, to our face creams, to cakes, and I think what we have here is huge issues of justice, what it means for cultural justice, economic justice, livelihoods, devastation scenarios being presented. But there's another aspect which is in terms of consumer justice. And again, I hope you heard when Dana mentioned that you collected a piece of paper to write your question or a scrap paper. I know I'm bubbling with questions. I'm sure you have those, so you can write those. We'll be collecting them. But for now, we will go to our last speaker, who's John Roulac, founder and CEO of Nutiva, the world's leading organic superfoods brand of hemp, coconut, chia, and red palm superfoods. John has authored several books on hemp to composting. He has also very successfully sued the USDA to keep hemp foods legal. In his copious free time, he has founded 4 nonprofit ecological groups, including GMOinside.org. Pretty obvious to all of us here that he's a leader in the natural and organic product industry. He's very passionate about genetic engineering and about consumers' right to know, has played a key role and has been involved in labeling campaigns around the country. And John, I hope in your 5 minutes you'd be able to share just some of the impacts on natural product industry, and then we'll come back to you with questions. So here's John.
Great. It's really nice to see a good turnout here tonight on an issue that I think is very, very pressing for for the natural food industry and the real food movement. Since the 1980s, I've been studying and an advocate for natural systems, from organic farming, permaculture to hemp agriculture. And myself, even though I've spent a lot of time reading and researching what's going on in agriculture and food and technology, I really didn't even know about synthetic biology up until about 3 months ago, which really struck me as like, wow, if I'm reading as much industry journals and looking at things and I wasn't seeing this, I think many people, even in the organic and natural food industry I talk to, have never heard of synthetic biology, which I also like to call is basically 3D printing of food. This is a new era, and it's not just going to be only about cacao or vanilla, but this, why don't we just print broccoli? Why do we need farmers? If we can just self-replicate DNA, what's the point? If that's going to be a lower cost. And I think, I think the other thing to understand the background from the large corporations' point of view, there is a challenge in the future of how do we encourage the young people who are the kids of farmers to follow their footsteps of the older generation, and that's, I think, is one issue we need to be looking at, and how we're going to deal with that, et cetera. So it's rapidly growing, the synbio industry. I understand it's growing around 41% projected from 2010 to 2018 to a global market of anywhere from 13 to 18 billion, depending on which research report you talk about. So we're talking about a lot of dollar volume. And as Dana mentioned, really what's driving this is a technology that was derived to produce algae oil for fuels and other chemicals, and it didn't work because of the economics. I thought if you could grow algae, that seemed promising 5 years ago, but for whatever reasons, it's probably not to get into, it didn't work, and now they're going to bring that technology into the natural food industry and other industries. So in natural foods, we're really kind of at the forefront of these products starting to come in to this, and they're going to be unlabeled, as they're basically going to call it natural vanilla. And how will people know the difference between natural vanilla grown by farmers or for other plants that are maybe not vanilla but that are derived from plant-based sources, non-GMO, versus synthetic? And right now there's no plan to label it, and so I think that's a real concern. And it impacts companies that are marketing things as natural or organic, and then how's that gonna work out? So the transparency is a big thing. And the other driver, I think, is the cost of goods. This is potentially, if the volume can increase and they can get success in the marketplace, they can really help to drive down some of the costs. But at what impact? Of huge monocultures of corn and soy to provide the raw material for this. And they're trying to, one of the things is, they're really working, what I see is they don't really want people to know that this is involving GMOs or genetic engineering. They want to call it nature identical is one term you'll see, or a fermentation process, fermentation derived. This is really under the radar right now, and so it's good for us to hear this, because to learn about this and talk about it. But we're definitely concerned in the natural products industry, and flavoring is just the beginning. It's something that the natural products industry is starting to look at, and the body care, and from what I understand, you're going to start seeing products in your body care products sold at like a Whole Foods that's just been considered natural. We've seen some of the things like Cheerios, other products being tried to sold as natural when they're really from GMOs. And so this is the next evolution of this battle of transparency, what's real, what's not, what's truly natural. So I could go on, but we really I think labels is really needed here, encourage that, and some more really oversight into what is like a brave new frontier. It's coming at us very fast. The power of computing and technology and science. And the East Bay here is and San Francisco and the Bay Area is the epicenter for this. But it's also an epicenter for organic foods. And so the organic food industry has one vision, and synthetic GMOs has another. And that's going to be interesting how that plays out in the coming years.
Thanks to the colleagues who are going around handing out paper and collecting your questions. Before we go into that, having heard you, Neth and Alejandrino, I was curious, when we saw GMOs being promoted, I remember the ads of Monsanto, where they would say they're helping farmers, and you had farmers dressed in clothes. Well, they looked like a Ralph Lauren ad, honestly. Never looked like any of the farmers that most of us have worked with. But I'm wondering, what is the silver bullet solution that they are offering or promising, hoping to sell this new technology to the farmers of the world? Because as we just heard from John, I mean, one could ask, why do we need farmers? So what is some of the myths that we might hear around it?
Yeah, the reality is they're not selling it to farmers because they know it will not sell in the first place. The things that we have been reading about in terms of the silver bullet, the attraction of the advantage of synthetic biology products, of commodity products that are produced with synthetic biology, is that they said this will address the problem with instability in supply. This is quite inhuman, unethical. Like we actually read a string of articles after Haiyan, after Yolanda struck the Philippines, the eastern coast of the Philippines, saying that this is one clear reason why we need synthetic biology. Yeah, they actually used that as a justification for this technology. They said, in a snap of a finger, you have millions of trees that were wiped out by this super typhoon, which actually affected the supply of coconut oil and also the prices. Like, I was just talking to John earlier before we started. It also emphasizes the speculative nature of pricing, because the typhoon hit November 25, and you can see the charts that November, the prices of coconut oil spiked, like probably by 10, 18%. Like, how could that be? So the speculative nature should not be the touch from all this promotion about the rationale behind synthetic biology. The market that actually defines the prices also has to be looked at critically. They also say that synthetic biology will address the complexities of the supply chain. Because you're talking about coconut oil, for example, where you have middlemen, producers, processors, being involved in the whole process, which actually makes the whole process expensive. So they will make it simple. You just deal with one company that produces the algae and produces the oil from vats after feeding them with lots of sugar. You deal with just one entity. So you actually remove the complexities without telling us that the complexities actually involve lives, economies, culture, people, jobs, no? Like the handful of jobs that vats and factories of synthetic biology lauric oil will bring to California. Like how much is that in ratio to the number of jobs and livelihoods that will be affected back home? Also, they are saying it's largely about the economics, about that, the stability of supply and prices. That's why I tell you that they're not selling it to farmers. It will not sell in the first place. In fact, there is much, I would say, much I think it's deliberate, no? That kind of ignorance on the part of the actors in the lauric oil, for example, lauric oil industry about this new development, because the less they know about it, and the faster this products sell, and it will actually take time for them to catch up. Before they know it, the industry is dead. And you have all these products being developed and sold from factories in California and in Brazil. So I think we also have to emphasize that, the access to information and the capacity of the players, particularly the producers, to analyze the potential impacts of this technology.
Thanks. And Alejandro, perhaps it seems like the farmers that are part of your community are aware of the threat that they face. Is there a message from them or any organizing that's happening on the ground? Because also I'm just thinking vanilla, many of us who have worked around fair trade vanilla is one of the key ways of bringing development, ensuring livelihoods of farmers, especially when they were put on a cash crop. So after having put them on a cash crop, when the threat they face now, any efforts on the ground in Mexico?
Bueno, primeramente, dentro de todos los campesinos tuvimos que hacer conciencia de todo lo que nos iba a perjudicar los productos sintéticos.
So first we had to do a lot of education with local farmers to let them know what the dangers were of synthetic products.
Y es por ello que optamos no competir a nivel mundial con la vainilla sintética.
And it's for that reason that we decided to not compete with synthetic vanilla.
Lo que optamos a hacer es empezar a cuidar la vainilla desde un modo más cultural.
What we decided to do is to begin to take care of vanilla from a much more cultural perspective.
Y eso, como bien sabemos, es algo irrompible y que además nos hace más fuertes todos los días.
And that's something that can't be broken and that actually strengthens our communities every day.
Thank you. Quick question for you, Dana. Are there any current, your question here was, are there any of the products that are in the market right now, and how long have they been here?
So there are a couple products that are currently on the market. One of them is a grapefruit extract and an orange extract and resveratrol. I think that's how you say it. Everybody else knows how to say it. And so there are a number of products that have been in the market. Both of those are primarily used in sodas and chewing gums. We don't know what companies that are using those right now. That's proprietary information. but they are out on the market. And I suspect that the next large product that's going to be coming out probably in 2014 is synthetic biology vanillin.
And I think just to follow up on that, the synthetic vanilla is probably going to go, Unilever is probably going to be one of the people to introduce that, or do we not know that yet? Evolva, but what brand though?
Oh, you mean what company?
Yeah, yeah.
We don't know yet which companies are going to be using it.
And John, I think very quickly you kind of outlined what's at stake, but I'm wondering if you'd really share with us a little bit more in terms of what's at stake when things will get labeled as natural. And another question is, does it lead to lawsuits? Because we do know several food brands and others have been sued to remove natural when they weren't really using natural, and is that a strategy?
Well, that's a good question. Many people maybe realize there's several lawsuits over the word natural right now. One of the industry's strategies is to have the FDA declare that the use of GMOs is, quote, natural. They've not been able to do that, and it may not fly. I mean, I think the one power that we have is an informed people in America who are interested in food, and food is becoming such a dynamic, growing sector because of the issues of health and sustainability. But lawsuits, I think, are going to be one thing. But do we really have to rely on using more lawyers in the court system? Instead, can we just be transparent? And this whole transparency around food, from the yoga mat, at Subway, which they recently made a change, and Taco Bell now is just announcing that only 88% of their meat in their taco is meat, and there's 12% other ingredients. And they actually just introduced, they actually are saying which ingredient it is and what it's used for. They've never done this before, and that's because of all of us who've been involved in asking questions, posting on Facebook, et cetera. So it is a big issue, we anticipate that organizations, which I'm involved in, GMO Inside, to Organic Consumers Association, Food Democracy Now!, et cetera, whoever the first major brand steps up and says, yeah, we're going to introduce, quote, natural vanilla on a product, in ice cream or whatever it is that there's going to be a concerted effort through social media. And that's when I would encourage all of you, if you want to see this change, is that makes a big difference. We put 50,000 comments on Cheerios' Facebook wall in a campaign we did 18 months ago, and Cheerios decided to remove GMOs from their yellow box cereal because of that. So they do pay attention through social media and pressure. So that's something we need to be aware that that's a key tool.
Thank you. Dana, it sounds like synthetic biology might allow humans to use less land to produce consumer goods. One would think that's something good, positive happening for synthetic biology. Any response to that?
So I think that in terms of land use, there's a lot of confusion. It's not a one-to-one ratio, and the amount of land that is used for, let's say, vanilla in an intact rainforest, or for coconuts, which is grown at a small and sustainable scale, versus a monocrop of sugarcane, which is destroying some of the most sensitive areas on this planet. It's not a one-to-one. The amount of land that would be used for sugarcane productions is immense. Part of the reason that we haven't been able to produce biofuels, for example, using this technology, is there isn't enough sugarcane yet, or biomass yet, on this planet that can sustain and that would support to the amount of oil, the biofuel that would need to be produced. In the same way, there isn't enough land, there isn't enough sugarcane available. We would need an immense amount of land to scale up. If this synthetic biology industry were to scale up not only natural products in food, in beverages, in cosmetics, in laundry detergents, we haven't even discussed a huge portion of synthetic biology, which is for which is for environmental engineering and using organisms to restructure coral in the water to maintain higher levels of what they can withstand underwater. Synthetic biology is an enormous industry, and the amount of land needed for this and the amount of land that would need to be converted from food and from products that will feed a growing population is huge. We certainly don't have enough land. And I just want to comment that there are some companies that say, we have a growing population. How are we going to feed all of these people? There's natural disasters. We need to move away from nature. But the way to do this is not through synthetic biology. The way to do this is not by removing sustainable agriculture products and practices through agroecology from people in this world and replacing them with crops that you can't eat, like soy and corn and sugar. I mean, I suppose you could eat them, but that's not going to help nutrition across the world. So unfortunately, that's a myth that it would require less land. In fact, it would require more in a very destructive way, one that requires a lot of use of pesticides and with sugarcane, slave labor.
There are so many questions here, so if you don't have a good handwriting, you know what's going to happen. So what I've tried to do is divide them into clarifying questions so we can all learn a little bit more, but at the same time in terms of strategy, so it's a useful evening. And I hope somebody will tell me when this evening gets over. First of all, what is the source material for a 3D printer producing a food item? Who would want to answer that? Yeah, what is the source material?
So it's the 3D printer. Whoever asked that question, let's talk afterwards. I'm not an engineer. It's a bit of an analogy. It's gone. But there was an image up there of ultimately a machine that is able to produce these nucleic acids, ultimately the DNA, and you have this super amino acid, I think I'm getting this right, that then, so now you have the liquid, ultimately, that you inject into the organism. So it's not like your paper, that's going to produce this thing. This is you're printing out DNA that then gets injected, and I'm happy to send photos of what this looks like, and we can go into more detail of that question. Yeah.
Thank you. Many of us who have questioned technology have been called Luddites. You're just anti-technology. So, question for any of you that any of the panelists can answer: do you think synbio could be safely and appropriately integrated into the sustainable food system?
I want to just say, first of all, and then pass this to everybody, that the things that we need to know before this is released into the environment and into our products are, is this safe? Has it been scientifically assessed by an independent third party, not just the company that is producing it? And we need our government agencies to have strong regulations. Right now, the regulations are more than 20 years old. They certainly aren't appropriate for regulating something like synthetic biology or even standard genetic engineering. So in order for this technology, in order to answer the question of is it okay, is it appropriate, there's a whole slew of questions that need to be answered first. And if in fact this is the silver bullet to save the world, wow, that's incredible. But given what we know, I somehow doubt that.
Just to follow up on that, let's just assume that it is sustainable and it is this great technology and it's healthy and all these things. If that was really the case, why do you think all the leaders of these companies, these CEOs and these marketing and PR people and their education people, why do you think that they are not coming and presenting to companies in the natural food world. You know, we've spent our lives figuring out how do we grow more food, how do we do it in a sustainable way. If they have a solution, and we're the forefront of looking at some of these issues, why are they not coming to our conferences? Why are they not presenting? Why are they not communicating with us versus we're basically hiding and not wanting anybody to know about this at all? I mean, there was recently, New York Times did a whole article on synthetic biology, didn't even mention the word GMO, didn't even mention genetic, they just talked synthetic biology. So it appears, it's pretty obvious, at least to me, that there's basically a plan to not not really be transparent about what they're doing. Because if it was so great, then why not share that? What's going on? It's just like Monsanto didn't come to the small farmer community or sustainability and explain this. They just went to the high level, got it passed through the FDA, through lobbyists, and then it's already fait accompli.
And Alejandro, I wanted to hear from you. Is there a place for synthetic biology in the way you cultivate vanilla? I mean, we want to get really clear and
primeramente es saber que la vainilla por sí sola es natural, no necesita ningún otro componente para hacerla, ¿no?
The first thing I think that is important to know is that vanilla is natural and you don't need any synthetic component to make it.
Y aunado a esto es decir, entonces, ¿por qué estas compañías, en vez de apoyar a los campesinos en nuestra región, los están haciendo a un lado?
So for me, a very big question is, why are these companies, if they're doing such a great thing, aren't coming to farmers and seeking our support? Instead, they're just staying away from us.
Y es entonces así como quiero llegar al punto de que la biología sintéticamente modificada, en vez de apoyar a la actividad en la cultura y al producto en campo, nos está terminando de hundir y de perder.
So that's why I believe that I'm thinking in Spanish. Synthetically modified, instead of supporting farmers and the way that we're growing things, they're actually seeking to finish off our industry and to finish off our communities.
Well, on that note, vanilla is natural, so why do you need synthetic? So let's talk regulation, right? So given that, what are some of the regulatory frameworks that could effectively regulate synbio? For instance, any of the GMO labeling laws, do they have anything around synbio?
As Dana mentioned earlier, there's no regulatory framework that governs synthetic biology at this point. When we brought this issue to the Convention on Biodiversity, for example, there's a lot of confusion, even among the staff, the Secretariat of the CBD, on where does it fall under. Like, there were initial assumptions that it falls under the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, but then a closer analysis shows that it doesn't. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety actually governs the transboundary movement of genetically modified, or the LMOs, living modified organisms, and the very definition of LMOs does not actually fit what Dana has been describing. So there's been an ongoing discussion on the past 2 years under the Convention on Biodiversity on how to regulate, how to treat synbio. There's a very informative paper that came out recently from the Secretariat of the CBD that actually introduced the concept of SMOs, synthetically modified organisms. And it actually offered options for definition, some of which Dana mentioned. So we're actually entering a new frontier, a new technology platform that even the current governance systems of current technology platforms are lost in terms of how do you handle this. And this is amazing, like in a world that we live in, where there's so much access to information, there's so much connectivity, the laws are actually being left behind. And you're talking of governance mechanisms at the global level, much more so at the national level and local level, where governments are grappling on what GMOs mean in terms of their environment, in terms of the impacts to livelihoods, and also impacts on commodities. And here comes a new technology platform that brings in a totally different set of challenges. So, and to us, it actually emphasizes the importance of not just access to information, but also stressing the importance of involving the consumers, the producers in assessing new and emerging technologies even before they're introduced into the market. We are actually into this grind, this hapless, helpless cycle, where we actually deal with the impacts of technologies when they're already there. When we could have actually controlled, regulated, participated in decision-making even before they are even developed. And we don't have that platform right now. There are ragtag mechanisms here and there at the global level, and also some forms of technology assessment platforms in some European countries, but there's barely any capacity for the different actors, regulators, and much more so producers and consumers who will be affected to understand what these technologies mean and what kind of impact it will bring into their lives. So I think we also have to talk strategically on how to involve citizens, how to involve the actors who will be suffering the impacts right from the very beginning in making decisions on technologies that affect their lives. Like the question earlier on how to integrate synthetic biology in sustainable agriculture, I think it's so loaded with a lot of fatal premises. It is loaded with a premise that we understand what synthetic biology is. It's loaded with the premise that we're involved in making decision on introduction and development of synthetic biology. And it's fatal because we're not. We're into this kind of discussion because we are in the dark in terms of this technology, and they are already being introduced in the market. They are potentially affecting economies and lives and cultures, and it's so detached from our reality in terms of us participating in decision making. And us as ETC, like we've been running after ambulances at the local, national, regional, and global level in terms of stopping this and that technology to the point that we're being called Luddites. We're not. We love technology, but we hate technological fixes. We know that societal problems cannot be solved by techno fixes. We know that the very framework that gave us the problems that we're confronting now in terms of climate, environmental degradation, also loss of livelihood, is not the same framework that will take us out of this problem. And to us, it is fundamental for us to be involved in discussions like this, not because we want to fend off the impact, but because we want to be involved in the kind of technologies that are being brought to us, not just as passive consumers, but active participants in making decisions on technologies.
I would just add, at the federal level, there are a couple of things that's happening here in the U.S. on the regulatory side of things. We're participating in some conversations that were just happening this past week at the NOSB, the National Organic Standard Board, to make sure that synthetic biology organisms are not allowed in organics, and to specify specifically on the national list that products, flavors, and fragrances and ingredients from synthetic biology-derived organisms are prohibited for use in organics. Another thing that we're working on the regulatory side is to make sure that products that are labeled non-GMO, that also means that there are no synthetic biology products in them. So we're trying to create ways for consumers where there are no labels that say this has synthetic biology-derived ingredients. If it's labeled non-GMO, if it's labeled organic, at least that's a starting place. And in the meantime, we are working to target and to pressure the FDA and the USDA to create regulations around synthetic biology. Right now, that term doesn't exist, and I think we'll get to it later, but in the meantime, while the federal agencies are perhaps a little too slow, we're also doing quite a bit of work, perhaps I should just talk about it now, on the market level. Friends of the Earth and with the help of allies such as Center for Food Safety and et cetera group are working on some market campaigns. And as Alejandrino said, the vanilla communities, the vanilla farmer communities have already been hit quite hard by artificial and synthetic vanillin, which already exists on the market. Now with synthetic biology produced vanillin, you're going to have all of the problems that he's mentioned, but more. It's the same sort of market replacement. They've already been hit as far as they can stand right now, and it's just one more or two more hits that could drive this down. And so what Friends of the Earth did is about a year ago, we launched a campaign specifically on synthetic biology vanilla. And the first major, this is going to be one of the first major uses of synbio in our food. And the big thing is not about vanilla, but more that this sets a precedent for a number of flavors and fragrances that are in the pipeline to come out. And we don't want them to set a precedent for ingredients to sneak onto the market and be falsely labeled as natural. So ice cream companies are one of the biggest users of vanilla flavoring. And so one of the things that we ask from everybody here and what we're asking our members and all consumers is that we put pressure on the major ice cream companies to make a commitment to not use synthetic biology vanillin when it comes out onto the market. And in fact, to not use synthetic biology derived ingredients at all. That includes cocoa butter or coconut oil alternatives, whatever it is. Let's make a commitment to keep this natural. And so that one of the ways that you can get involved is by participating in campaigns like these. We have all of the information, ongoing, updated ways to get involved on nosynbio.org. And I'll switch the slide so it says that up there. And then on the other side of things, as Neth said, we're really pushing regulatory agencies both nationally and internationally to regulate this technology to protect human health and the environment. And there's a report that's out on the front desk. It's kind of a hefty report, but it's called The Principles for the Oversight on Synthetic Biology. And in it is listed what is it that we want to know, what is it that we want to see in place, and what are we pushing for before this can be put out onto the market as sustainable and natural and healthy, and before this is propelled into our world as something useful. This clearly outlines exactly what it is we want to know and what it is we want to see first.
Thank you, Dana, and thanks for the good work you all are doing. Yes, Alejandrino.
Algo que sí es importante y yo quisiera resaltar es que en México no hay leyes que regulen la entrada de estos productos sintéticos a nuestro país.
So an important point that I want to raise is that in Mexico there are no laws that regulate the entry of synthetic products.
Y es por esto que las compañías que se dedican les es más fácil entrar al territorio mexicano.
And that's why for these companies that use synthetic products, it's easier for them to enter industries in Mexico.
Desafortunadamente nuestros gobernantes tienen otras prioridades que la problemática que ahora estamos viviendo.
Unfortunately, the priorities of our government are such that they're not concerning themselves with the issues that are being raised tonight.
Thank you, Alejandrino. For you, John, here's a question. What possibilities do you see for making common cause between small, medium-scale farmers, say coconut farmers in the Philippines, and elsewhere, companies like yours, and consumers of coconut products?
Well, I think education is a key aspect, and that's one of the reasons why we're here, to alert people about what's going on. The challenge often is the large multinational corporations are often better funded, have stronger contacts with government, et cetera. But I think, I'm interested in, seeing how we can help educate some of the farmers in the Philippines about this. Given that we're the largest importer of organic coconut oil from the Philippines, that this is something coming down the line, and but building those networks and connection is key as we go forward on many levels, not just the food industry.
I had a question, which is, we have heard a lot about companies and products, but which countries are kind of taking leadership in this technology? I mean, where's China in it all? Well, in the US, we love to talk about China.
I think that in terms of the production of synthetic biology, there's a number of labs all across the world. Switzerland, here in the Bay Area, we've got quite the hub of synthetic biology companies and labs. We have UC Berkeley trying to set up some labs along the green corridor on the Richmond campus and into Emeryville, in San Francisco. So there's quite a number of them right here. In terms of where they are in the world, I'll have to get back to you on specifically China's.
There was a question here about local companies that are engaged in this research and production, their names and location. But it seems like what we've just heard is that East Bay Area is very active, and I'm sure it'll be good after the event is over if you want to meet with the organizers, people who know so much more, to see. One last question that I see here is, to what extent are pharmaceuticals and vitamin supplement companies using synthetic biology? We have talked about the food industry, but in terms of supplements and that happened with genetic engineering. When the golden rice doesn't work, we need it because it can produce life-saving drugs. So might we hear something around that?
And specifically around synthetic biology produced drugs. Okay, so I think one of the things that we have seen synthetic biology used for is in anti-malarial drugs, and one of the naturally produced products, which again is a high-value, low-volume drug, is or product is artemisinin. What is it? Artemisinin. And so one of the big problems that you have here is the idea is that there's more malaria in the world, there's a lot of mosquitoes, we need to help solve problems of contamination, when in fact, first of all, it's been declared internationally that there is quite the abundance of there's quite the abundance of the natural products needed to produce anti-malarial drugs, and in fact, the production of this material using synthetic biology is purely market-driven. There is no need for this. In fact, we have an overabundance of this, and again. There's also a lot of research. I would point out that one of the biggest drivers of problems of disease is not dengue per se, but poverty. And when you take people's economic drivers away, when you take away their ability to earn money, I think that is the biggest problem. And so you hear, when it gets into the question of synthetic biology applications to medical products, you need to be careful. Some of it might be worthwhile exploring, and we can't put a blanket statement on what is good investment of research for synthetic biology and what isn't. But we do need to look carefully at, is this needed? Can we produce this naturally? Is it more sustainably done naturally, or are we removing the livelihoods of millions of people across the world and plummeting millions of people into poverty? Is that sustainable, and is that going to help prevent a disease across the world?
Thank you, Dana. Before we conclude this evening, I wanted to just give each speaker a minute to see if there's anything that they really wanted to say and could not say. Starting with, we could start from that end.
Bueno, primeramente, decirles que la vainilla para nosotros tiene un valor no solo económico, sino cultural, y para nosotros representa una identidad, ¿no? Y pues con esto mismo, darles a conocer que si bien es cierto que están entrando productos sintéticos a nuestro país, nosotros como comunidades indígenas estamos luchando para que esto no llegue más allá. Es decir, estamos tratando de cuidar nuestra vainilla desde un trasfondo más que el sistema monetario. Estamos volviendo a los nuevos sistemas de producción que anteriormente se tenían. Estamos transmitiendo ahora los conocimientos a nuestros jóvenes, es decir, a nuestros niños, a nuestros hermanos, ¿no? Y de este modo creemos que va a ser un punto muy importante para que la vainilla natural no desaparezca.
So, one thing that I wanted to definitely say is that for my community, the value of vanilla goes way beyond economic factors. For us, it has a cultural value, and really it represents an identity for us. So we know that synthetic products are entering into our industry, but as indigenous communities, we have decided to respond by fighting to take care of the natural production of vanilla and to begin educating the younger generations about this knowledge and these practices so that they can carry them forward.
John?
I would just ask each one of you if what you've heard today raises some concerns, some questions, if you feel that this approach to not labeling, to producing some extreme GMO without people even knowing, if that raises some concerns with you, that you are a handful of people in America today. You are like more educated now than 99.9% of the population. So that I would encourage you to take that back to your community, whether it's a school or your work, share some of this information, and also encourage you to like some of the organizations here on the panel here on via Facebook, and start to share some of the content. I mean, if we could get even 20 of you here to start sharing some of this with your friends and posting on Facebook, the awareness, because 20, and you have 300 people in your network, that can really spread. In 6 months from now, we could reach 50 or 100 or 200,000 just with a couple dozen people here. And really encourage you that. And GMO Inside's working with Friends of the Earth, and we're going to be creating graphics on this right now. We're not as focused on this. We've done a little. We got our hands full with a Monsanto milk campaign with Starbucks. Encourage you to check that out and the use of GMOs. But this is something we need to educate people on, and it's important to do that.
Thank you. Jenna?
So I would just build on one of the things that Alejandrino said and what John said, is that vanilla is just one example of the many products that are coming out. And when we talk about synthetic biology, we're talking about a very dangerous technology, dangerous because we know nothing about what the impacts are. And to think about this not just in terms of your own personal health, but also the environmental impacts, the cultural impacts of communities like Alejandrino's, but around the world, in every possible country that you could probably think of, where there are agricultural products grown, where people depend on these agricultural products for their livelihoods. And the ways to take action, as John is saying, is that each one of us needs to have our voices loud and clear. One of the websites, I don't know if it's listed up there, synbiowatch.org is becoming an international platform for staying up to date on what is going on with synthetic biology across the world in different countries as well as in the US. You can also go to knowsynbio.org. And these platforms are both working together to make sure that we have ways to participate as consumers in market campaigns like the Vanilla campaign, as well as targeting our federal agencies and international agencies as well. But the only way that we can make change and the only way that we have ever made change is through individuals becoming very active and loud and unified. And so I ask that if this is something, as John said, that you care about, that you take action from here. Stay up, stay involved. As you talk about genetic engineering, don't just talk about GMOs, but incorporate synthetic biology into what GMOs are. Because now we're not just talking about the technology from 1974, we're talking about the technology of 2014, and we need to be up with that.
Thank you, Dana. Neth?
Yeah, thank you. There's actually so much to say and so little time, and I'm privileged to be part of this panel and speaking before you and building on what the previous speakers have said. Like, I think taking action as individual and as collective, not just here, but in countries around the world, in developing countries where the production of this, the natural commodities are happening, and linking arms with the producers themselves in developing countries is the way to go. Like linking arms and also providing information, disseminating information, asking critical questions. Because like if you listen closely to what we have been discussing, like there are some critical questions coming out here and there, but there's not much platform or mechanisms for people to ask these questions and challenge the developments in the technological fronts, and also challenging the reality that we are being left as passive consumers of all these products of all these technological advancements. I think we have to fight that, not just the absence of information, but the alienation that it's actually bringing in society, alienation from the process of producing food, alienation from those who produce food. Because like if we understand how the process of production of these commodities are happening, we will be more sympathetic. We'll be much more concerned. It's not just an issue of devoting less land for coconut production, but also understanding that coconut in many parts of the world, in the Philippines, for example, are actually grown side by side with food. People live under all those shades of coconut trees, and food are grown in those under those shades. And also, if you look at these technologies up more closely, rather than falling into the trap of technological fixes, like ask more critical questions. Who's behind this? Like if you talk of philanthropy and synthetic biology and medicine, you'll be surprised at the names behind the propaganda. Like Gates Foundation is very much into the production of the synthetic biology, production of artemisia. And also, if you look at the names that Dana flashed, and just who are they and why are they're there? Like why is British Petroleum interested in this? Why is Unilever? Why is Mitsui investing so much on all this production of synthetic biology? It's not suicide. It's also, of course, to create alternative sources, that the easy way, without taking care of the faces and the livelihoods and the economies behind the so-called complexities of the supply chain. So I think the more we connect ourselves to the people who produce the food that we eat in the urban areas, the food and commodities that we consume in industrialized countries, the more we connect to rural communities and to developing countries' producers, the more we understand what's at stake. The more we understand and see beyond the veneer of techno-fixes, and also the more we question techno-fixes as a framework. As I said, I think the whole discussion of synthetic biology also underlines the whole issue of power in terms of technology. That we don't leave that decision in the hands of handful corporations. Definitely, we don't leave it in the hands of regulators. We have to be involved in decisions on technology, in capacitating regulators and ourselves, and evaluating technologies that end up in our table?
There is something new on the horizon, actually not on the horizon, it is already there, which is launching this attack yet once again on the poorest, the most marginalized, and yet the food producers of the world. Majority of the economies in the world are rural agrarian economies, and you have a handful of companies that have again decided to profiteer from that. Thank God for those, individuals that are on this panel, as well as organizations such as Friends of the Earth who are organizing these events. I want to remind, as Dana pointed out, this was a free event made possible thanks to foundations such as CS Fund, as well as individuals who support this. Please help spread the word, support this so more such panels can be organized. And please join me in giving these wonderful, amazing people who traveled from far away to come and share their passion, their wisdom with us. Thank you. And anyone whose question didn't get answered, you can reach me at Oakland Institute because I'm going to get out of here.